What do you think are some of the kind of main challenges that people come up against?
People trying to make difficult, expensive decisions in 48 hours. The affordability of it, plus the quality of that one-on-one service in your own home, it's definitely worthy of a much wider conversation than I think it currently gets.
Some of the carers we had were hit and miss, but when we got a really good one, totally life-changing for the whole family.
It is incredibly possible to do it now,
Mm.
where perhaps 20, 30 years ago it was harder to do.
What do you think are some of the biggest misconceptions about live-in care? So Fred, tell us who you are and give us a little bit about your background.
So I'm Fred Lloyd George. I'm the co-founder and chief operating officer at Hamilton George Care. Uh, Very brief background into me is I was in the army. I was an infantry officer for 7 years. I left and joined a tech startup called which was a large-scale social care platform looking to place carers with people who require care in all across the UK. I then went and worked at NHS Digital for 2 years during the COVID crisis, and then out of the back of that, set up Hamilton George Care, which is a high-end boutique care company. Again, looking specifically at long-term slash live-in care in people's homes.
You were working for NHS Digital, I understand, during the pandemic. So
Yeah.
we've seen a lot of the issues that we're having with adult social care. Um, and obviously there are a lot. So, for families that are going through this, supporting elder parents and trying to navigate social care at the moment, like what were some of the important things that you learned or discovered during that time?
Yeah, I mean, I think the key one from my side, as far as understanding the social care structure and is available to you from the government or from the country, is it's really important to understand that the NHS and local authorities don't operate together. The NHS can provide guidance to local authorities and provide a level of testing and experimentation. But as far as your social care solution, that's going to come from the local authority. So understanding, one, which local authority you're in, understanding what their sort of policies are, what their funding options are, understanding who the key people to speak to is really important. And we still get people calling us up asking, how they should contact the NHS about getting this care support. And I think whether it should be a local solution or a central solution is a big debate. But the big advice for families is, really understand what is that local solution and what you're entitled to.
Yeah, and I guess that changes all around the country depending on which authority
Exactly.
you're in. And you're
I
right, I
think,
think a lot of people do think that they're a lot more connected than they are
yeah.
NHS and social care, and they're not.
Think and I think the other thing as well is that, is that they do not have a lot of money for this, and
Mm.
I think sometimes people think that they're being unfair or being mean, for want of a better word, but it's not. It's that they have, a lot of there are a lot of more and more people requiring, support in the community.
Mm.
Um, social services have to prioritize that money to make sure everyone's getting supported, especially the sort of less well off in the country. So I guess really the blocker becomes a political one then.
What do you think are some of the kind of main challenges that people come up against? And just to give you a bit of background, my mum had motor neuron disease when I was a teenager. We had to get live-in carers as well, and it could be hit or miss. And when it worked, it was amazing. When it didn't, it was challenging. But one of the biggest issues I think we found was just getting over that initial hump of my mother accepting having a stranger come into the house, kind of take over a little bit, and having to relinquish some of that control and put herself in, somewhat an intimate situation with someone she'd never met. Um, I don't know, from your experience, having worked with different families, like what do you see as some of the major obstacles to people kind of, in firstly maybe seeking and finding this care, but also then kind of making decisions around it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the key thing I always see is people trying to make, normally children trying to
Mm.
make difficult, expensive decisions in 48 hours. So there's been a diagnosis or something has happened with a parent. A doctor has said you're going to need live-in care or you're going to need a care solution in order to get out of hospital. And the children then, as quickly as they can, put together a expensive solution in the home, often without the person who's going to be receiving care, them necessarily involved in that decision.
Mm.
Um, I liken it to leaving the house, realizing you needed to get somewhere, and just buying a Porsche rather than
Yeah.
looking at like the timetable for a bus or what trains are running.
Mm.
So I think that's the first thing is, and then ultimately what you get, as I think you sort of explained, you've done so well from a sort of first person experience, is you have someone receiving care who feels like they've had some sort of independence or control taken away.
Mm.
Uh, and processing a really difficult diagnosis or processing a really difficult lifestyle change. And so if you paint a different picture, if you when you sit down and talk about your retirement, or you sit down and talk about your kind of health insurance with your parents, if as part of that conversation you go, well, actually, have you thought about these three things? Have you thought about what environment, where do you want to receive care when and if you need it?
Mm.
uh, Thought about whether you want to be at home, whether you want to go to a sort of residential facility, if you want to stay at home, if you thought about at what point you'd like to move. If you talk about the finances of it, it's expensive. How are we going to afford it? Are we eligible for local funding? At what point do we become ineligible? And how are we going to pay for this environment that you want? And then I guess the final one that I always think is really important is the need. So something like motor neuron disease, as soon as you get that diagnosis, you don't know when it's going to happen, but it's going to be high
Mm.
needs. And again, that's a really emotionally challenging thing to deal with, especially if you're trying to come to terms with yourself, but you've got family members being like, well, look, we do need to get something in place though.
Mm.
Um, Understanding kind of where that need is going to take you and how that impacts the environment and finance. So I think that's broadly how I would suggest to clients how they look at these decisions.
It's so difficult, isn't it? Because you want to be practical and it is important to have this, but they are so difficult for the person on the other side. And I think sometimes you have a little bit of discussion sometimes, and then they don't want to talk about it, and then you have to come back to it and try again at a different angle. And I think, it takes time for people to get used to this idea of what's happening to them, and having to kind of, like you say, take the next step.
I
Um,
I think getting some of that documentation in place quite early on really helps as well. So
mm,
things like a will and power of attorney, especially power of attorney, health and well-being power of attorney. There are areas in that where you can write wishes. So
mm,
even say you give your children power of attorney in your 60s, 70s, in there you could have considered, when you want to receive care, where you want to receive care, and how that's going to be funded for, and you can
mm,
give direction to your children. Again, if you're putting a power of attorney in place after some severe cognitive decline, or in a situation where you're not wanting to talk about it, you lose that aspect of control over your wishes.
mm.
Uh, and so I always think the will and the sort of power of attorney are really good places to start. Um, when you're putting them together, also think about your care, because there's areas in there for specifically for that.
Yeah, yeah, it's tricky. Very good advice.
Good advice in theory.
Yeah, in theory.
Yeah, yeah,
But, what do you think are some of the biggest misconceptions about living care that people
yeah.
have?
So I think the first one, well, the first thing is that people don't know about it. I
Mm,
don't know if that's necessarily a misconception, but in the misconception in the sense that people don't know that it's there. I think the sort of the traditional UK care journey structure has always been support from family and kind of community for as long as possible at home. And at the point where full-time care is required, that's when you move into a care home. That's certainly been the kind of Australian, UK, and Australian sort of models since the sort of 1940s, 1950s. So I definitely think living care is far more available now. Somewhere like Elder, where I worked before, they were they were able to place people in homes all across the UK, and were doing hundreds of hundreds of those a day through their technology. So I think live-in care is becoming a very much like a viable option against a care home. And if you do want to stay at home, you can stay at home. Through palliative care, through end of life care.
Yeah.
Um, you can all of that can now be delivered in the home,
Hmm.
especially with greater advances in video calling. The ability for our nurse who oversees all of our placements at Hamilton George. She's able to at any point have a video call with a carer to see what's going on, and kind of make an initial assessment and triage of that person receiving care.
Hmm.
These things weren't available 20 years ago, or if they were, they weren't greatly understood.
Hmm.
Uh, so I think it's the ability to remain in your home longer, which statistically is proven that most people would want to do if it's the option. So that's the first thing. I think the second part of it as well is, um, it's always been seen as a premium service.
Hmm.
So very much for kind of wealthy families to have that care in the home. I think that's a huge misconception. I think as far as care goes, it is an expensive thing to get, but actually it isn't that much more expensive to have care in your home than it is to go into a care home, or
Hmm.
later stages to go into a nursing home. So I think, the affordability of it plus the quality of that one-on-one service in your own home it's definitely worthy of a much wider conversation than I think it currently gets.
And I think, I mean, I read the Atal Gawande Being Mortal book, and obviously there's more and more evidence now that actually, the longer people can stay in their own homes, if that's what they want, the
Yeah.
better they will do health-wise, because it's not just about their medical safety and the medicalization of care, obviously, which has been an issue, but also about their just general quality of life, being able to still be within their community, you know, go out to the shops they're familiar with and things like that. So
So
I'm
yeah.
very happy to see that it's moving in that direction for sure.
I think also having that sort of control over, these sort of no, sorry, the sort of lifestyle that does impact conditions like dementia, where actually just, the visit from your local friends and family every day, or being in control of your diet and your food, and also, being able to be in a familiar environment which is geared just to your needs. All of these aspects have been proven, sort of to delay the sort of impact of
Mm.
dementia, cognitive decline. I don't like bashing care homes too much, because I
No,
think it's really important,
yeah.
and I think they do an amazing job, and there are some wonderful care homes out there. But I think the underlying message from me on it is, if you want to stay in your home, it is incredibly possible to do it now,
Mm,
whereas perhaps 20, 30 years ago it was harder to do.
absolutely. You've obviously met different families, and I
Yeah.
wonder if you've come across ones which are, you know, sort of really impressed you in terms of how well they're coping and managing this, or even people who've, you know, where there's been a situation where the family are needing to get a living carer and actually it's worked really well, or where it hasn't worked really well.
The starting point with care is that no one wants it. That's always why I think living carers, all carers are amazing, because they're going into an environment where the person, and often the whole family, doesn't want that person there. And
Yes.
being able to change their minds and go
Mm,
and actually see value in what they're doing, and realizing care actually is, in the end, it's the sort of improvement of that time of life that you're in.
mm,
That's always amazing to see. And actually, I think and this is again going back to my initial answer, why I got into care, is I just love seeing those kind of people problems and seeing them being solved with these amazing humans that are sort of living carers.
yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I certainly, from my perspective, you know, like I say, some of the carers we had were hit and miss, but when we got a really good one, it
Yeah.
was totally life changing for the whole family, and in a way, they cared for my mom, but they also were my carers because I couldn't have done it without them as well. And they became part of the family, and they're just angels as far as I was concerned. I'm not religious, I was just, would have been
Yeah.
completely lost without them. And
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, we were very skeptical about it at the beginning as well, having a person we didn't know in the house, but with the right person, it was really lovely.
And I think that's I think often, and you know, the conversation around care at the moment is, I think, at times unnecessarily negative.
Mm,
And you know, we're always very good at talking about the problems, and there's not enough carers here, and there's sort of politicians aren't making decisions. But actually, I think it does lose the human aspect of these amazing humans. And you know, we're so lucky at Hamilton George, and one of the natures of being a sort of boutique company is we only work with fantastic carers.
mm.
So actually, kind of getting to know these humans and watching them kind of change people's lives is amazing.
Yeah, they are amazing. And it does bother me how much people undervalue care
Yeah.
and carers, as a
Yeah,
society.
or just the faceless nature of it. You
Yeah.
There's no, people just talk about carers as if it's, yeah, as if it's sort of this sort of faceless sort of creature that just sort of comes in and out. And actually, it isn't. It's someone that's chosen to kind of dedicate their life to this incredible cause. And I still interview all our carers, and they all, all of them have a passion and have had a sort of calling into
Mm.
it. So yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It to me, it's a bit like medicine.
Yeah.
It's vocational and it requires a very, very specific kind of person and character. From your sort of observations, how do you think kind of home care is changing, or how people are caring for their elder relatives, how that's changing, and or are there any changes that aren't happening that you'd like to see?
Yeah, I think it's becoming more holistic. So before, you had the sort of kind of care companies with the website of, a someone receiving care being sort of pushed in a wheelchair, and it was all very much focused on the medical condition.
Mm,
I think actually what I see with care companies is the medical condition, or at least this is what we do at Hampton George, is the medical condition is the baseline. So the minimum you're doing is sending in a carer who can provide care for dementia or um, companionship or Parkinson's, whatever that illness may be. And actually, but care is expensive. It is, you are hiring a member of household staff essentially. So what I think people are looking at now is much more the, well, fine, the person receiving care will be taken care of, but actually, what are the pieces on top of that, which are going to help not just the person receiving care's life, but also the family as well. So whether that's kind of running errands, taking over all the medical appointments and bookings, so a carer almost becomes a case manager.
mhm,
Uh, whether it's companionship in and around the home, going to the opera, reconnecting with friends and family that they haven't seen because they've been too far away.
mm,
Uh, so that kind of that driving and that sort of support element, diary management, personal assistant,
mm,
going on holiday. Lots of requests now for carers to travel and take people back to like family holiday homes or hotels that they haven't been to in
mm.
ages. So I think it's from my perspective, I think, yeah, that sort of following COVID, when social care and care came much more into the public eye for the first time, actually, people realizing that the care is kind of the minimum delivery, and
Yeah.
actually everything that you layer on top of that, which
Mm.
is where the value gets driven from. So that I think that's exactly where we should be heading towards.
Mm. And I guess particularly because dementia is becoming increasingly a difficult issue we have to contend with our aging population. And certainly with my father, his care, yes, involves booking appointments, making sure he's taking his medication, but a lot of it is also making sure the food he's eating is really good for what he's going through, that also, is the sort of food that he enjoys to eat,
Yeah,
and that we're doing activities that slow the progression of the disease. So there's the sort of management of the condition and also the prevention of it progressing, as quickly as it might do otherwise if he was not getting that extra layer of support.
yeah.
Um, but that's great. That's wonderful to hear that. that it's going in that direction. Let's hope it continues.
And I think that's what I say as advice for families is, talk about the care needs, so the personal care and the medication management, all those things that you'd expect, but also think about what else do you need from this service, from someone who's there one-on-one in the home. You
Mm,
know, they need to be doing activities, they need to be keeping that person engaged and
mm,
in control and with independence as long as possible.
mm. How do you recommend that people look for a care agency? I mean, as you said before, often it happens in a crisis and people suddenly just try and find one within 24 hours. But
Yeah.
if somebody has a bit more luxury of time, often people just go onto Google and search live-in care company. But is that the best way? What do you normally recommend to people?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of our new families come from referrals. So I think we're around about 65% at any one time we have from referrals from families. So I think that's always the best starting position if you can, is picking up the phone and speaking to someone who's gone through a similar process or gone through a similar situation,
Mm,
and getting their feedback on what worked with the agencies that they had, what didn't work, and then any recommendations for the agencies. If you are on Google, um, the best thing you can do is just speak to as many people as possible. Um, Everyone has a slightly different way of going about it. Every company is a different size, so so obviously the bigger companies will have more of a visibility on Google, because they would put more into digital marketing. Um, but some of the smaller companies would be worth speaking to as well, because you get a feel between the different ethos and the different way in which they look at care and look at their recruitment. So talking to as many agencies as possible if you don't have the luxury of speaking to a family or friend.
what are your hopes for the future of care in the UK and around the world?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd really like it if the kind of the care message started to become more positive. I think there's a huge amount of good news out there, and we've got loads of amazing people in the country who are carers. There are advances in drugs for dementia, for cancer treatment, for Parkinson's. There's a greater understanding of environment and how to live better as well as longer. And I feel like sometimes the media cycle, it's the easy kind of story sometimes just to pick up the negative. Um,
Mm,
I think politicians can help massively by pushing the policy forward. We've essentially had policy uh, um, stagnating for the last 20 years,
mm,
and actually be really nice to see a government be positive and actually make some difficult decisions that we know are going to push that along,
mm.
and everyone having a more positive conversation about the quality of living longer in this country. That would be great.